Hey everyone, welcome to the Doctors Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, talk about the art and the science of the things that we're putting on our feet. Today, it's going to be a solo episode with me, Matt, talking about cushioning. Unfortunately, because of a delayed flight and my prep for my dissertation defense, which is on June 25th, which I either may or may not be a PhD when this episode comes out. Due to a delay, I was not able to make it to our normal Sunday recording, so decided in the middle of the week when I had a brief moment to record my own episode to clear some stuff up. And the reason I want to talk about cushioning is there's a couple reasons. First, obviously, as we get into more footwear stuff, things are becoming more and more cushioned. We're seeing more stack heights. We're seeing more intense foams. I'm going to reference the Saucony Triumph 22 as a great example, where one of the first daily trainers, at least not one of the first ones, but one of the more mainstream daily trainers, to have a full super foam, quote unquote, Power Run PB midsole. There was one or two others that were trainers beforehand that have come, but that's for the kind of the first mainline one. And you're seeing more cushioning, you're seeing increased stack height, you're seeing all this stuff. And as people talk about this, I really want to educate people on what cushioning actually is, how our bodies respond to it, how we perceive it. And then the final question is it even good for us or not? And so I'm going to try to answer all those questions in a hopefully brief and appropriately long episode. So let's get into what cushioning is. And one of the reasons I bring this up is because I still see a lot of people and hear a lot of people refer to cushioning as support. They say, I want a shoe with a lot of support. And then they get a shoe with a lot of arch support and like, oh, that's not what I meant. So cushioning refers to the underfoot feeling of the shoe as you walk, run, compress it. It's what you feel underneath. It's usually people associate with being more protective. The more cushioning something is, you could describe it as firm or soft. This is much more in the vertical plane, although there's some other planes of motion where this can influence, as opposed to support really refers to more the frontal plane or side to side. So like arch support, be it on the inner or outer side, medial or lateral side. Support really is what is influencing side to side motion of the foot. Cushioning is more of the vertical or up and down compression of the sole, how it responds underneath your foot. And there's a couple different ways you can define that and think about that. So, and I want to clarify that it's an increased stack height doesn't necessarily mean more cushioning, right? Because people will define things differently. You can have a very high stack height shoe that people might describe as firmly cushioned. You could have a more moderate stack height shoe that people might describe as soft. And we'll talk in a little bit how there's some other factors besides the shoe that might influence that. So first, let's talk about a couple phrases that you really need to know. We've mentioned this quite a bit on our written and on this podcast stuff, but I want to clarify when it comes to shoe cushioning, there's two terms you really need to know, and it's resilience and compliance. When people talk about responsiveness, like you compress a shoe and it bounces back, it makes you feel faster, it's a really bouncy shoe, that's referring to resilience. And that refers to when you deform a material, how much does it return to its original form and how quickly? So resilient, a highly resilient midsole foam is going to compress and bounce back quite a bit. Something like a Nike Vaporfly midsole, a Saucony Endorphin Pro type midsole, a Alphafly 3 type midsole material is going to bounce back and have a very high level of resilience. That's different than something called compliance. And compliance really refers to how much the foam deforms. An example is the New Balance 1080, the newest version that I'm holding up right here. This new foam compound that they have, it's still Fresh Foam X, but they really changed the parts of it and had the makeup. This is one of the most compliant midsoles I've ever run in. It is the softest shoe I've ever been in. And so again, this is not how much the shoe bounces back, it's how much the foam compresses. So more compliant foams tend to compress more underfoot. And so hopefully we can clarify that resilience and compliance mean two different things. Resilient foams are typically those more bouncy ones. Compliant ones are they're just those soft shoes. And the really purely compliant midsoles are the ones you're going to sink into and probably not get a lot of bounce back up. And that's totally fine. And the reason I want to clarify those two things is when we talk about cushioning, there's different types of cushioning, and it goes beyond just the different types of midsole foams. And why I say this is because you may have heard or seen a recent episode with Mizuno where we talked about their new the Neo Vista, which I thought was a full PIBA midsole, and I was totally wrong. It was actually an EVA based midsole. And so the typical wisdom was that when it came to midsole foams and cushioning, PIBA foams were the more resilient foams and EVA was firmer. Now, that's a very old view because realistically, and I learned, and this was emphasized to me when we did that episode, is that you can modify soles in all different kinds of ways and change the cushioning properties. And I can guarantee you that midsole foam, I might be wrong. I'm not a material science expert. I can also guarantee you that's not purely EVA. Almost all midsoles out there now are some form of blend. And I got to reference the Saucony team, who's always awesome for teaching other stuff, Andrea Paulson and Corey, that everything is a blend. So when we try to only classify things by one thing, you're going to get lost. And again, the Mizuno NeoVista is a great example of this, how when it comes to cushioning, it goes beyond the midsole foam. It also includes things like place, which can also make something feel firmer, or in the case of NeoVista, even softer if they set it up the right way. And it's also the geometry, how the foam compresses, how you load the shoe can also impact how things feel underfoot. Now, I say that because midsole foams, now with the blends, you can't just be like, oh, this is only PIBA. It's only TPU. It's only EVA. It's a combination of all that stuff. So you're going to have to rely more on how it feels underfoot and thinking about how resilient or compliant the midsole foam is. And we know those two things are different, by the way, because there is some research, and I will include this in the show notes, about how midsole cushioning actually impacts you. So one of the first things we always talk about, and everybody gets on, is running economy, which, to clarify, running economy refers to running efficiency. It doesn't refer to speed, but although improved running economy might help your speed, running economy refers to running efficiency, right? How much energy you're expending versus how much you're saving. There is evidence to suggest that more resilient foams, the ones that have more bounce back, typically help and enhance running economy. The same cannot be said of compliant foams. And for anybody that's ever run in a super soft shoe, you might notice that you're like, hey, it's really cushioned, but I don't feel like I'm saving a lot of energy. It feels like it's kind of hard. Like sometimes they're so soft, it feels like running through quicksand. Resilient foams can help improve running economy. Highly compliant foams may not. Okay. And there's a great study by Warbitz back in 2014, which kind of one of the standards that showed this. It's a really, really great study that I encourage you to read, that looked at, again, softer but more resilient foams can help with this. But as you look at some of the more maximal shoes, just having a higher stack height doesn't necessarily mean more efficiency. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean you're getting improving your running. So like a lot of, let's say, Hoka shoes, for example, other than a lot of their super shoes, which are great, by the way, a taller stack height shoe does not, and a more cushioned shoe doesn't mean you're going to be having increased economy. So Mercer et al. In 2018 looked at that with maximal shoes and found that the actual, the cushioning geometry didn't necessarily help a lot, at least significantly differently, for improving running economy. It was specifically the resilient softer foams that helped, not just a softer or higher stack height shoe. There's also the other factor of when it comes to how we respond to shoes of our individual body, and how but there are some kind of biomechanical things that most people will go through, but different people respond differently to different shoe types. Some person's going to do really well in a very low cushioning, maybe a minimalist shoe. Somebody else is going to do great in a super highly cushioned Bondi, NeoVista, what have you kind of shoe. We all have differences. However, how we react to the shoes, there is some similarity. So when you're running on a surface and you land, especially during initial contact or that initial and loading phase when you're absorbing shock, your body has to adapt and act to absorb shock. How much motion your joints go through, how much your muscles stretch, gives your body sensory input to figure out, okay, what's going on underfoot. So your perception of cushioning actually is very individual. And this explains a lot of things why, again, to reference the Saucony Triumph 22, which I'm holding up, Nathan and I had very different experiences in this shoe. Nathan felt like this is one of the softest shoes he's ever run in. I felt like it was firmer than I expected for a shoe with Power Run PB and this much maximal foam underfoot. And that has to do with how we react to the shoe. I am probably getting slightly different sensory information compared to Nate because we have different bodies. Okay. So our what's called joint proprioceptors and other nerves in the different areas of the lower extremity, but especially the joint, pick up how much the impact's going through everything, how much our joints are moving, and will give us information to our brains that our brains can determine, oh, this is either a really firm surface or a soft surface, and I should react accordingly. Okay, which is why we always try to have a variety of reviews, because somebody might perceive something as a little firmer, somebody might perceive it as a little softer. Regardless of your perception, people tend to have fairly similar reactions to certain cushioning types from a biomechanics standpoint. So a firmer shoe or running barefoot, if you don't have any cushioning or minimal cushioning underfoot, when you land, people typically, when they perceive something to be firm, they typically tend to have more joint excursion, which in English means that your joints are going to move more. You're going to get more lengthening out of muscles and tendons because your body is going to be trying to do active shock absorption. If there's something firmer underfoot or a harder surface, your body has to do more shock absorption, so you're going to see more motion. This is very normal. It's actually one of the reasons why in some people with osteoarthritis, for example, getting them in a more minimal shoe can be helpful to teach them how to shock absorb better. Okay. Don't always assume that less is worse and more cushioning is better, because there's some variations that I'll explain to you about how people react to them. But typically people move more with a firmer shoe or a firmer surface because you need to shock absorb. A softer shoe, because the foam is already compressing underneath and the softer shoes are inherently a little less stable, people will tend to move less. And there's a great study that we reference all the time from Kulmala et al. In 2018 that actually found that people, when they run on softer shoes, typically have less joint exertion, less joint motion. They land much stiffer is the appropriate term. And because of that stiffer landing, they can actually have increased joint loading, which is normal. It's what happens when you have a softer shoe. Your body is looking to find stability, so you stiffen up. Okay. That's why we try to really get people away from the idea of, when you have a more cushioned shoe, it absorbs more shock for you. That's not necessarily true, although there's some truth to that. You actually get more loading inside your joint because your joint doesn't move. You don't move as much. You don't get as much active shock absorption. You might get some passive stuff from the shoe, but you don't have as much active shock absorption. So instead, you land stiffer, and there's actually more forces within and loading within the joint. Okay. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, just can benefit different people. So one of the reasons some people may notice that when they put on a cushioned shoe that they have less discomfort with like an irritated joint is they may be going through less range of motion and may not go as far into a range that is painful. That can be one reason that people go, I wear this cushioned shoe and this took away my knee pain. Okay. That might be one reason. You go, wait, isn't that supposed to be increasing the load in your joint? Like, yeah, but I have less pain. I'll address load in just a second. Okay. Other people might go, hey, I ran in a minimal shoe, I ran barefoot, and I had less knee pain. I'm going to use the knee because it's a common complaint that people have. I had less pain running in a minimal shoe. That person probably is starting to shock absorb better and use more active shock absorption. And for that person and their individual pathology might have helped them. Okay. And that can go the opposite. Somebody can do a more cushioned shoe and say, this caused me more discomfort because I feel like I'm stiffing up. Or somebody who's running in a minimal shoe might say, there's just not enough cushioning underfoot and this increases my knee pain. Okay. It's more cushioning is more complex than, and injuries are more complex than, I just have a joint problem or I have a muscle problem and this shoe fixes it. You have to get more into what specifically the pathology is and how this person's going to react to a shoe. Okay. So there's different variations on that. And there's also the variation of people will perceive the shoe differently. Like I said, between me and Nathan and a lot of the reviewers on this team, we sometimes have different experiences, and we'll tell you that because our bodies are not only reacting in a certain way, how we perceive it is also going to be a little bit different. Now, the thing that's not different is I mentioned that with softer shoes, you typically tend to stiffen up and you can have increased joint loading compared to a neutral shoe. With a minimal shoe, depending on how people react, typically there can be more muscular loading, might be more joint loading at the ankle, but you need to realize that based on the evidence, forces by themselves are not always associated with injury. It's actually lots of cases where the opposite can happen because when we run, regardless of cushioning, forces underfoot modulate a lot of tissues. Okay. Your muscles absorb them, bones absorb them, and they can actually adapt to that. So some load is always a good thing. How people react to that load, that's where things get confusing, because some people react really well to more, some people react better to less. Okay. So realize that joint loading and loading isn't always associated with injury. And that was actually found, because despite Gumala's study finding that there's increased joint loading with softer shoes, Thiessen, who had Laurent Maslow, who's a really big shoe researcher that we had on the podcast some time ago, and has done a lot of the research on footwear in the world, found that when softer, like more cushioned shoes actually were able to modulate injury risk. People that ran in more cushioned shoes typically had lower rates of injury, which also makes sense that, yeah, you're getting some more passive shock absorption when you run in more minimalist shoes. If you're running shorter mileage, okay, minimalist shoes can actually be good for you. But if you're running lots of miles, there is an increased injury risk if you're not ready, which a lot of people don't really prepare themselves with. So that was Thiessen et al. In 2014. So, a decade-old study right now that's been around for a while. But again, how people are going to react to that is going to be totally different. People that get less joint excursion or need less joint excursion might do better with a softer shoe. People that need to shock absorb more might do better with a firmer shoe. Okay. And I won't say that one is necessarily better than the other one, because people react differently and they have very different needs. I'm going to, again, reference Laurent Maslow, a study that came out in 2015. Again, another one that we love to reference, is that parallel use of different shoes, i.e. having different shoes, actually can reduce injury risk. And the study used very different stimuli to do that. So you might find that your body does really, really well with cushioned shoes. And that's totally fine. If you can only get one shoe, and I get the finances are tough right now, and we're very fortunate we get to test a lot of stuff. And hopefully this website helps you make those decisions to figure out what's better for you, what might not be worth your hard-earned money investment. If you find a really cushioned shoe works great for you, awesome. Stick with that. It might not hurt to have a little less cushioned shoe every once in a while, just for some variety, because our bodies typically do well with a little variety. Instead of having one thing all the time, which might increase your risk of overuse injury, having little variation and a little different loads might help your body adapt and spread forces out a little bit, because having a cushioned shoe versus a non-cushioned shoe is gonna have some very different impacts on your system. Okay. A very cushioned shoe is really going to require a lot more stiffness. It's going to require a lot better stability from the low extremity. So your stabilizer muscles are going to have to work harder, like your deep hip rotators and a lot of the frontal planar side to side motions, like your posterior tibialis or your anterior tibialis, or your peroneal muscles in your foot and ankle are going to have to work hard to stabilize. Your muscles are going to contract more, not 100%, but they're going to contract in a little less motion and have to work on really stabilizing, getting stiff, compared to a less cushioned shoe or a firmer shoe. Your body's going to actually not need as much stability, and firmer shoes typically are more stable. We'll talk about stability in a second. Firmer shoes are typically more stable. So you don't have to worry so much about stability. You have to worry more about active shock absorption. So you're going to see more sagittal plane motion front to back of knee flexion, ankle dorsiflexion, hip flexion, as you get through those motions, so your body can actually absorb shock and go through some joint range of motion. Different things, right? So soft shoes need stability, and you're going to get a lot more muscular work from your stabilizers. Firmer shoes typically require more active work from the large muscle groups to help you shock absorb and attenuate forces. Okay. So minimal shoes, for example, we always tell people you better make sure you have good ankle motion, good knee motion, good hip motion, and also have really, 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 really good strength in your calf muscles, especially, and your knee, because harder you land, more shock absorption that you need. Okay. So you're going to be using a lot more major muscle force compared to a softer shoe, where you're going to be using a lot more stabilizer type muscles. Okay. So different things for different people, and people have different needs. Okay. So I cannot say, and I refuse to say, that one type of cushioning is better for everyone. You have to look at your own needs and figure out what I respond better to. And frequently it's, hey, what keeps me healthy, but also what feels good. I previously, now that I've run in so many, I'm getting better at this. I typically don't do very well in softer shoes. Those of you who know me know that I typically need a little bit more stability, and soft shoes are not really that stable. Okay. I'm really impressed. And I mentioned this shoe earlier with the New Balance, the newest 1080. It is the softest shoe I've ever run in. I can't run that far in it because I start to fatigue because my stabilizer muscles are working so hard that I start to fatigue. I can't do that versus a moderate to slightly firmer shoe. I tend to do better in because it's the inherently a teeny bit more stable, and I do a little bit better with that. I typically need a little bit of guidance for stability, and a little firmer shoe typically helps me with that and then also helps me shock absorb a little bit better. So yeah, so do I get better active shock absorption? I get a little more stability. And when I run in softer shoes, my muscles get frequently really sore because they're contracting so hard for me to find stability that doesn't do as well for me. Other people are going to find it's the exact opposite. Okay. You might find that, hey, I run in softer shoes. I feel much better. I feel much more fresh versus I run in firmer shoes. That, man, my joints are hurting. My muscles are achy. So again, you need to find what works better for you. Don't worry about your neighbor. Don't worry about the Instagram runner. Don't worry about the social media person that includes me. Okay. I'm not that big. Okay. But really make sure that you're figuring out what works for you. And that requires some experimentation. And if you have a pathology, it also might help you to go, you know what? Based on some of the evidence, a firmer shoe or a softer shoe might do a little bit better for me. But then you also have to go put the thing on and figure out, are you part of the population that they studied, or are you your own unique person? You have to figure out what works for you. Okay. So make sure that you figure out what works for you and don't be afraid to experiment. That's, if you get nothing out of all the stuff that we talk about, we're trying to teach you how to figure out things for yourself. And that can take a little bit of experimentation. And that's part of any scientific process. You got to experiment. You got to ask good questions. You got to go through the motions to figure out what that is. So experience can be very specific. Focused experience can be very, very helpful. My last comment on this is I mentioned stability, and I love to talk about stability, and it's gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. We've moved away from having these really stiff posts that made shoes sometimes unbearably firm or just got in the way to now more guidance-based concepts. And a shoe that I'm really enjoying right now that I can't do anything fast in is the ASICS Kayano 31. And so the Kayano series has evolved quite a bit over the years. It's now got it's like 40 millimeters of stack height in the heel. The midsole foam is softer than it's ever been. There's a very unique system where instead of having a post, they've done the opposite, where they actually have a softer, more resilient foam in the midfoot, where it actually causes you to bounce out. And I can feel that. It's been really cool. I didn't notice it as much with the 30 version. 31, they definitely refined it, and I get a lot better motion out of this. What I will say, despite being softer, I actually like the guidance better in this shoe. But that's because I typically do better with mild stability shoes. This shoe used to be very high, very aggressive. And because it is much softer, the level of stability is less. It's no longer that high stability shoe. It actually feels really good and seems to adapt to me depending on how much you need, because the way they design the shoe is not just with the ability to bounce you back out, which is how your arch actually works, is you're supposed to be able to pronate and come back out into supination. So, but also the fact is, the more you compress the shoe, the internal geometry has been set up in a way that the more you compress into it, the more it actually starts to firm up. And there's some internal things in here where it helps guide you through. So you'll notice that parts start to firm up a little bit. Like for me, when I collapse really heavily and fatiguing, I do feel a little bit more medial support, because as I compress that area, I'm going to notice it more. Okay. So they're using guidance where they have kind of a more soft area through in one area, a little bit firmer, a little more blocky in certain parts to help guide you through the center, plus wide sole, plus sole flaring on both sides to keep you really centered. So you can still have a stable, softer shoe, but the softer shoe the more difficult it is to stabilize, just because when you land like that, you're going to stiffen up, and you now have to work on shock absorption. So the Kayano is a great example of where, yes, they're doing a good job. It's not as aggressively stable as it once was because it's more cushion, but they are working and trying different ways to create guidance and stability while working around that. So hopefully this helps you define cushioning a little bit better. I would really encourage you to, if you're looking at reviews, take what's said with a grain of salt because you might have some different variations. That's why I love, as I said before, when you read our reviews, when we have multiple people testing a shoe, I always love it when people have different experiences because that tells me, okay, different people are going to respond differently to this shoe. So either find someone on this team or a totally different review site that has similar mechanics to you and follow that person. That's going to be a great thing for you because it's like, okay, this person has similar like preferences and mechanics to me. Go find that person because that's going to be the best like kind of understanding for you as an individual about how the shoe is going to be because our experiences can be very, very different. This is why I love the RunCat scale, which I've referenced many, many times, which is a great study that was done out of Australia that found that, again, a lot of how we react to a shoe is based on our own perception and not always by biomechanics. Okay. So our sensory system or how we process things can play really a big part in what shoes will work better for us. And cushioning is part of that, right? So how the forefoot feels, how the heel feels, how stable the shoe feels, all those factors. I encourage you to look up the RunCat study because they've got a great scale that can help you when you put on a shoe, figure out how good the cushioning is. And again, you don't necessarily want something that's more or less firm or more cushioned or more firm. You want something that feels good for you. You want that Goldilocks fit. The things that have the Goldilocks, it's just right, are the things that are going to work best for you. So just to clarify, more cushioning isn't always better. There are things that happen to you and more stress or different stresses that happen with more cushioned shoes. There are different things and different stresses that happen to you with less cushioned or minimalist shoes. Okay. You might have a lot of foam underfoot. Shoes might be perceived by you and others by really soft. There's other factors that might make the shoe feel really, really firm. Okay. So cushioning is a little more complex than, oh, what's the foam type and how much materials underneath. It comes down to how the material and the geometry and the plate, whatever it is compressing underfoot and also how you're reacting to it. So hopefully that helps. We will continue to have episodes on this. As always, I love geeking out on this stuff and I really hope that it's helping you. Be really helpful, by the way, if you leave a review, if you find this stuff helpful or not. And by the way, a lot of the content that we make is inspired by your comments. We don't always get a chance to respond to them. And I can say that for emails right now. I'm very behind because, again, totally in dissertation mode. Again, I defend my dissertation on the 25th of June. So like I said, I might either be or be not a PhD by the time this uploads. But leave a comment. You got something really burning question. Don't be afraid to email us. It might take us a little bit, but it does help us because we want to help you. We want to help guide you, want to help you make better decisions, not only financially so you can make better purchasing decisions, but also help you figure out what shoes work best for you so you can stay healthy, so you can actually enjoy activity or running or whatever you want to do. So thank you as always for listening, watching, whatever medium this is on. Really helpful if you give a like, follow, whatever medium you're on. As always, we're putting out new content all the time. We're a little slow right now because I'm doing my PhD. We're a little crazy busy, but we always appreciate your patience and always appreciate you following along, listening, and hope it helps.